My name's Tim Summers, and I'm the AARP Montana State Director. It's my pleasure to be with you this morning. The Lifespan Respite Coalition is near and dear to my heart, mostly because of the caregiving that I've been involved with, but also just seeing the amazing, inspiring stories that generated from you all, and the incredible job that you do serving your loved ones. It's much appreciated. With that, I would like to introduce Elaine Ryan. Elaine Ryan is the Vice President of State Advocacy and Strategy Integration in the Government Affairs Department of AARP. Elaine leads a team of legislative staff who work with 53 AARP state offices to advance AARP's advocacy agenda with governors and state legislators throughout the nation. She has been involved in the enactment and implementation of many landmark laws over the years, such as the creation of the Children's Health Insurance Program, welfare reform, the Medicare Modernization Act, and the creation of the first federal office of women's health research, to name a few. Elaine earned her Master's of Public Administration from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and her undergraduate degree in economics from Fordham University. Elaine also brings her own personal caregiving experiences, stories, and humor to the topic of caregiving and compassion fatigue. On a personal note, I've worked with Elaine for about 10 years now at AARP, and in various capacities, and I've got to tell you, you will not find a more experienced and tireless advocate for the 50 plus throughout the United States. Plus also, if her day job, if she ever retires, she could be a stand-up comedian just like that. So it's been a delight to work with her, and I'm thrilled that she could come out and spend time with us this week in Montana. So Elaine, thank you.
Thank you. So I know you all can see me back there, right? Great. The good news is I have PowerPoint. The bad news is I won't be using it much. So that's all good. I do want to just give a shout out to all of you for taking out time today to participate in this conference. You know, it is so difficult to break away, even if it is your job or you're a caregiver, to take a step back and be able to do something for yourself. And so hopefully today you'll have an opportunity to hear some great presentations. I want to say I've been to a number of family caregiving conferences. I have never seen massages offered at any. So I want to say Montana is first in the nation in massages. I'm not sure that's the way you want to be known, but I do want to say it's my pleasure. And another shout out to Tim Summers and the fantastic ARP Montana staff here. Back in D.C., by the way, thank you so much for the invitation so I can get out of there. My favorite definition of Washington, D.C. is 68 square miles surrounded by reality. And I want to say that the work that ARP Montana has done this legislative session on family caregiving changes and expansion for home and community-based services and enactment of new caregiver supports is exciting. And what I love about my job is that people are very divided in this country about red and blue, but frankly, when it comes to family caregiving, it's all personal. When people hear policy experts, I want to let you know all my expertise in family caregiving was derived from being a family caregiver. And I really encourage you, if you see something, as my dear sweet mama used to say, is radically wrong with the system, speak up. You just could be proposing changes that could help your fellow citizens through the system that isn't a system of all of caregiving. So I will say just one other thing. When my parents, God rest their souls, I lost them both several years ago, and my brother and sister and I were looking through all the documents that my mom had saved, and found out that she had saved everybody's report card from kindergarten through college in order. And I pulled out my second grade report card, St. Patrick's Grade School, Lockport, New York, 14094. And Sister Mary Cecilia wrote these comments. Elaine, talkative, yet frank. That was second grade, and I think Sister Mary Cecilia got it spot on. So with that, I'm timing myself because I don't want people to start throwing hooks and saying, stop it, and I can't believe you invited her, Tim, and okay. All right, so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to break down my presentation in a couple of parts. First, some personal reflections of family caregiving, and then a little bit about compassion fatigue. And what you might look for, and then a little bit of a quick loop around what's been going on in some innovative respite programs at the community level and in other states that you might be interested in thinking about as you put together kind of your ideas moving forward. So I want to say that I was a long-distance family caregiver for my mom and pop for 15 years. And I want to thank U.S. Airways, which is now bankrupt, for flying me from Washington, D.C. to Buffalo, New York, almost every weekend of those 15 years to care for mom and pop. Now, as you know, there are principal family caregivers, people who are there on site, and then there are people who actually wrap around with family caregiver duties. You may recognize in your own family, people have different roles. Some deal with finances, some deal with the medical pieces, some deal with the cooking. We're all family caregivers. And the one thing that folks don't realize is that in this country, there are 40 million family caregivers. There are 118,000 here that identify themselves as such in Montana, 118,000. But we know that number is low because people don't define themselves as family caregivers. Their husbands, their wives, their mothers, their fathers, their sisters and brothers and friends and neighbors. So we know that number is a lot bigger. But if you were to pay every family caregiver in Montana for the work that you do in unpaid care, it would cost $1.4 billion a year. And so the biggest heart of our healthcare system in this country are really family caregivers who are on that front line. In fact, nationwide, if you looked at all of that unpaid care for family caregivers, it is $450 billion a year. That's larger than Medicare. That's larger than Medicaid. That's larger than the annual sales of Walmart. The amount of time and energy that's going to wrap around to care for loved ones is incredible. So for everyone here who's a family caregiver, give yourself a round of applause for that, okay? So let me tell you a little bit about how I got into family caregiving. Our journey started about as innocently as journeys really start, where my mom slipped down the stairs of a 2-floor house that my parents had rented for more than 40 years. And that slip landed her into the hospital and then into rehab. And it was quickly concluded by the people in that rehab facility that she should stay there permanently. Now, my father calls me and says, this is after about 30 days in the rehab center. And he says, Elaine, I need you to come home to spring your mother. Pop loved prison movies, you know, so he was like, you gotta help me get her out. She wants to come home. And I said, okay, Pops, I'm coming home. So I come home and we meet, and everyone's well-meaning, and just a shout out to people in rehab, and this is Nurses Week, and to all the nurses who give their care and all the rest. But my mother and father did not want to stay in a nursing home. They wanted to come home. And so my mission was to help them find that way home. So Pops decided that he and my mother would buy a house. So a one-floor house. So if you want to see what Mom and Pa look like, here's my Pa. Okay. Thank you. I just thought I appreciated my staff people putting a picture of my sister, me, and my mom and Pa. So my parents decide they want to buy a house. In upstate New York, you can buy a small ranch house for about $60,000. My father said, come with me. So we go around the neighborhoods where he has lived all his life, and he pulls out a flyer from the house, and he says, get a load of this, great starter home. So at the age of 78 and 82, my parents became first-time home buyers. My mother said, Elaine, do they take cash? And I said, I don't know, drug dealers buy cash. Maybe they do, maybe they do. I always use a conventional mortgage, but my mother had squirreled away her Social Security and saved that for years while making my father pay for everything. And they bought their home for cash. I will say, though, that it was the spirit of wanting to be in their own home and community, nearby their church, nearby their loved ones, that really made the difference for them. I will also say that it tickles me that my parents, as I was going through all of these journeys with them, and I'll talk about a few more, the bumper sticker that I have on my office bulletin board reads, long-term care, fix it before I need it. And people say, like, oh, where can I get one of those? And I'm like, I said that so often that one of my staff people had that made up in a bootleg bumper sticker company for me. Because you know, if you've gone through this caregiving journey as you're going through it now, the system isn't set up to support people's needs the way it should be. And so I feel like the pathway to reform long-term care in this country is using everybody's personal experiences to say, how would it work better? How would it be better for you, for your family, your loved ones, your friends, and your neighbors? That's why AARP launched a family caregiving campaign several years ago across the country to change state legislation around the country to support family caregivers. And I'm just proud to say that through the efforts of our state offices like Montana and other state offices, since 2014, 125 laws have been enacted in 49 states to support family caregivers and their loved ones. And you know who our lead advocates are? Family caregivers. You know who gets it? The state legislators and governors who are family caregivers, because they know that Simple changes can make a huge difference. And so I don't see red and blue in this country. I see a subtle shade of purple, and it's in need of people coming together to figure out what's best to be able to support our family and our loved ones. So AARP crafted something, and I'll just tell you another pop story. He was the greatest, an old Navy man. But Pop, as you can see in this photo, my mom was in a wheelchair. Pop's in his 90s now in this photo. But I came home one time because I'd come home to buy everything that was heavy. I'd buy the water, the bread, the milk, the juice, the laundry detergent, all those things, and then I'll get to what Pops used to buy, which were all the lighter things, because for Pops, shopping was his respite. I'll get to that in just a minute. I come home one day, minding my own business, trying to visit them, and I love them so. And I see that my father has rigged up a ramp to my mother's bed with sheetrock and cinder blocks. Yeah, Pop's rigged it up himself. So if he could get my mother's wheelchair going at the right speed, he could turn the corner, go up the ramp, dump her into bed. True story. I said, Pops, I don't think this is particularly safe. She loves it, he said. Don't worry, she loves it. Oh, Elaine, I really do. I look forward to it. Millions of family caregivers are just making do. I went in and I said, Pops, I think there's actually a device we could get that could help you lift Ma into bed. So we go down to Lockport Home Medical Supply and I order myself up a Hoyer lift. Does anybody know what those things are? Okay, Hoyer lifts, right? Well, here's what I did. To assure my mother it was safe, I demonstrated it by putting our dog Tiger as our first passenger. I taught Pop how to put Tiger in, make sure that Tiger was safe, swing the Hoyer lift into the bed, and ease it down. I will tell you that millions of family caregivers like my Pops are just making do in this country. They don't know about these things until they absolutely need them. One reason why AARP's passed something called the CARE Act in Montana, woohoo, you just enacted it, so thank you. Shout out to all of you. It has three simple things. One, when a person goes into the hospital, the name of the family caregiver should be recorded into the file so that people know who's going to be at home with people when they come out of the hospital. Number two, adequate notice prior to discharge. People say, oh my God, okay, it's 3 o'clock, your mom's coming home today. You're like, what? I haven't done the laundry, I didn't do my shopping, I got to get new medicine, I got to change the sheets. Adequate notice. And finally, the third piece is a simple instruction of the medical tasks that people are going to be asked to perform when they're home. And those simple things, I will say this, and it may not be causal, but we started, and the first state to enact the CARE Act was Oklahoma. And I had the pleasure and really honor of meeting our lead advocates, the Mercers. After 3 tours in Iraq, Jim came home and got on his motorcycle that he hadn't ridden in years. And he got into a traumatic accident. And that accident landed him into the hospital. And then after some time, he came out, and his wife, God bless her, was trying to move him from the pickup truck to the wheelchair to get him into the house, and she broke his leg. And that's because no one helped her with how do you appropriately transfer someone. And they became our lead advocates in Oklahoma. And Governor Phelan in Oklahoma, first governor to enact the CARE Act. And now 38 states have enacted this simple change that can make a big difference. You know, it doesn't cost $1 million. It costs some time for someone to stop and say, can I show you how to do this? Because you know when, as I will say another one, God, it was so great. I will tell you, my parents, after they bought their home, they were in their house for about 8 years. So after they said the nursing home was the only place for my parents, it ended up that they could stay at home safely. God bless Pops for doing the best he could, but you know, he didn't know anything about giving medications. So my favorite one, I saw him standing up to the light of the window that had the brightest light in the house to fill the syringe that he was giving to my mother. And, you know, I was a long-distance caregiver, so I didn't really want to get into his business. It didn't look quite full to me. And I said, hey, Pops, you know, that doesn't seem to be right up to the line. And he goes, oh, that's okay. I'm giving her another one at 4 o'clock. You know, I mean, Pops got the care he needed. I want to let you know I didn't leave him hanging. We did have a Nurse Sue, eventually come in to be able to help with the caregiving needs. But a lot of people are making medication mistakes because they just don't know. Do I throw out the old medicines? Do I keep the new medicines? What should I do? What happened with the dosage and so forth? The CARE Act can help with that. I will say this, that a new study came out at the University of Pittsburgh just did that said that because of the CARE Act and involving family caregivers, there was a 25% reduction in rehospitalizations in Pennsylvania. Yikes. You know, do you know that 1 out of every 6 people on Medicare leave the hospital and return to the hospital in 30 days? Do you know how much that costs this country? And the Medicaid dollars are just about the same. So if we can get people with a little bit of stabilization, a little knowledge before, and then at home a little support, maybe we can make a difference. So respite care, and I know that's the theme of this conference, and I do want to spend a little time checking on Sister Mary Cecilia, who's up there saying, Elaine, you're killing them. No, I'm not. I'm doing well. Thank you, sister. Okay. And it is the month of May. All right. Now, anyway, I will say that respite care is just so critical. You know, I don't think I fully appreciated the need for respite care when you were going through the family caregiving experience. I don't think my pop really understood the need to step away because he was so obligated to help. And so giving people permission to be able to refuel and take that break so they have that strength to carry on is just so key. It's not selfish. It's not that something's going to be happening if you're going to step away for 30 minutes. It's inherently important for you to take care of yourself as a family caregiver. I will say that on my father's 85th birthday, my brother and sister and I were figuring out what should we do for Pops. He's been so great. What would he want? And so we decided no more ties, no more football games, no more this, no more that. Pops, what do you want? And he said, I always wanted a rose garden. I said, great. Why did you wait 85 years to tell? Okay, good. So my brother and sister and I went to the garden store. We got all certain varieties of roses, and we planted him a rose garden that he could see out the bedroom window, stand out in the back, tend to it, and all the rest. And we were so proud. And said, Pops, you have a hobby now. And he said, oh, this isn't my hobby. Your mother is my hobby. True, because Pops really spent all of his time caring for her. And sometimes these things are said in jest, but they really underline a more, I think, important point that Pops very seldom took a break. I will say, though, as you recall, I'd come home to buy everything heavy for, the week. And I'd make dinner and I'd freeze things, or my mother didn't like freezing things much, so I'd make them fresh and blah, blah, blah. Okay. But I'd come home and I'd open up the refrigerator door. and I would see an abundance of bread, milk, butter, and eggs. When I write my father's biography, it's going to be bread, milk, butter, and eggs, the respite care story. Because my father would go out and shop almost every day at the local market, whether he needed food or not. It was his breakaway. It was his socialization. It was his community. When he passed away, there were more people from Tops Friendly Market that came to his wake than we ever knew existed. We had the butcher, we had the baker, we had the checkout people, the people who brought him his stuff to the car. You know, Pops shopped because it was his respite. He bought a frying pan about every other week because he was a short order cook in the Navy and he figured frying pans were just the best thing ever. So these are signs, though, I will say. When I opened up that refrigerator and I saw, you know, bread, milk, butter, and eggs, it would be great if we were making omelets all day or souffles. But it was a sign that that Pops was really using that shopping trip as his respite, and he needed some help. So I want to talk a little bit about compassion fatigue, and just a couple of notes for you to take down. You know, sometimes people don't realize when they're really hitting this compassion fatigue. In fact, people who have studied respite care have now made a point of saying that there's something different than feeling burnt out. Okay, you know, burned out, you can step away and all the rest. But these are some of the pieces that you might look at in indications of whether or not you or your loved ones might be suffering from some compassion fatigue. And I know there are experts here and certainly in your community, but I do want to just give you a couple of these things because when I was researching this, I realized, you know what, I think some of us had that, or I think a friend of mine is suffering from that. So these are the ABCs of compassion fatigue. But if you're losing sleep or you don't seem to be able to sleep through the night, if your response to some stressful situation, you know, that you may have seen every day is more intense, more angry than you've ever been before, that could be a sign. If you feel like you just can't think straight, like maybe your judgment might be impaired, like you don't know which way to turn, that kind of confusion at a very high point, that could be a sign. If you're feeling isolated, if you feel like, you know what, no one quite knows what I'm going through, so don't bother telling anybody, I'll just keep it to myself, and you're isolated, that could be a sign. If you feel like you're losing hope, if you feel like you can't carry on, that can be a sign. If you feel like you're losing your own self-worth, that could be a sign. So these types of things are really, you know what, as a caregiver, I certainly had a lot of those. But if you're seeing it, the best way, I think, is to have one of your friends or neighbors or family check on you. Are you reacting a little bit more than you should? I remember I was coming home, my mom had brain surgery, and I didn't know anything about brain surgery, okay? I want to let you know, my degree is in economics, okay? I know nothing about the brain. But I had to pick out and make the judgment who was going to do brain surgery on my mother. And I found that coming home one day, I just had this incredible tick in my eye. And I was like, oh, geez, I better go. And I went to the eye doctor down the street, and I said, gee, I don't know, I wear contacts. Is there something else? Am I having a brain tumor? I mean, you know, you go through a lot of these things. And he told me that's like one of the signs of stress, when you're keeping it all inside, but you're having a kind of twitch. I had to check on myself to make sure. I needed him to tell me. Or even my sister, God bless, you know those report cards? My sister had a particularly good 6th grade. All right, I told her I would always tell people that. But my sister would say, you know, Elaine, geez, you usually roll with these punches, and that really struck you hard. What's going on? You need someone to bounce off. And sometimes if you're the only caregiver when a one-on-one situation, and this is a very private thing, you need to step out of that and try to seek audience like these and people you trust. It could be in a church, it could be in a neighborhood, could be somebody who sees you every day, could be the butcher at Tops Friendly Market that is talking to my father. I will say these don't always have to be medically diagnosed, but I will tell you compassion fatigue can be very debilitating. And if your health goes, you're in no shape to care for your loved one. So here are the ABCs of prevention. Bless you. Bless us all. Bless us all. First, awareness. You know, try to step back and see whether or not any of these pieces that I've mentioned might be something you're experiencing. Are you tired, but are you feeling like you're working harder but not working smarter? You know, can you get aware of, am I really acting out? Geez, did I really react to that too intensely? Am I so angry? Have I yelled at someone, as my mama used to say, for no good reason? These are signs that you may be suffering from compassion fatigue. So be aware. That's the A and the ABCs. Thankfully, I'm not going through the entire alphabet. B is balance. And balance is all about taking care of yourself. Stepping away. Go to the doctor, go to get a massage, go out with your friends, go to a movie, care for yourself. And also find some things that make you happy, that make you feel grateful. You know, things that will always put a smile on your face. What are those experiences? How can you recreate them? How can you get that deeper sense of gratitude? You know, through all the strife that we experience in caring for Ma and Pa, I wouldn't have changed a year of it. I was so grateful for the stories, for the history that I learned, for the things I never knew about how my mother met my father and how it was the worst decision she ever made in her life, according to Ma. But the gratitude of that oral history or their humor, or even the joy you might have in gardening. Or I flew in last night and I said, oh my goodness, I forgot there were mountains in America. You know, those beautiful mountains and that full moon and that richness. You've got to find the joy, but only you know what really brings that to you. But you've got to step away. And finally, connections. That's the C. You're not in this alone. You know, I was in, thanks to Tim, they invited me to Sheridan, Wyoming, and I went to their statewide caregiving conference. And the mayor of Sheridan was on a panel, and he broke down in tears. He said it was the first time he spoke publicly. Here's a man who's the mayor. The first time he spoke publicly about being a family caregiver to his mom with dementia. And he took that all on his shoulders, even though he was funding programs in town, never telling anyone about it. His word was, reach out. You do not have to be alone. You can find some connection. Think about the people you know. Think about your friends from high school, like Shauna Pritchard. Thank you, Shauna. You're here. You reminded me of Shauna. Give them a call. Reach out. Be proactive. Don't feel alone. meetings like this are really critical for us to have that kind of strength to carry on. So I'm sure you'll be hearing more about such things. I will say that there are some interesting programs that I'll just quickly go through. Thank you, sister. You can see my Catholic. Oh, good. My Catholic kilt is rolling right through. Sorry, Ma. I talked about this. I just want to talk a little bit. Some states are moving ahead with different respite care ideas and proposals. This year has been tough for a lot of state legislatures because there isn't a lot of money around. But states like North Dakota and South Carolina and Wisconsin and New York have put in some new resources for people with Alzheimer's and dementia, family caregivers for respite services. You know, one of my favorites is a simple idea, and you probably have heard of it or have something like this. I told you I'm going to say hello. Okay, it was in Sheridan. Sheridan has this thing in Wyoming. I will tell you, this visit to Sheridan, Wyoming, for me was like life-changing, because it was a little community that came together to try to figure out what they could do to make things better for family caregivers. And they have this thing called Daybreak, which isn't a full day respite care, but it's a couple of hours. So people can come in your house, stay for a couple of hours, then leave, or you can drop off your loved one for a couple of hours in a center, a community center, where they can get some socialization, you can get a break. It's kind of a win-win. But what was really powerful to me about the conversation in Sheridan is that the restaurateur in town got up on a panel and started talking about, well, wait a minute, there's really dead time between lunch and dinner. So what if I had respite hours where I could offer a break for family caregivers to come in and get a meal? I was in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and there was a little cafe called the Cape Chat Cafe. And what it is, I saw this little sign at the cash register, and it said, Monday, photography, Tuesday, caregiving, Wednesday, art and oil painting, Thursday, caregiving. And I said to the woman who owned the shop, what's with this caregiving thing? She said, well, you know, it started with about 8 of us who just needed a break. And then we just decided to gather every other night so we could just, you know, have a drink or not have a drink, or just share stories, or try to find a safe place where you say, you know, I really wanted to kill my mother last night, but not being hauled away, you know, and you don't really want to say that in public. But I do want to say that there are things happening at the community level in this country that are communities and families supporting other families that are also equally powerful to real professional programs for respite care, where you can get some intense services for things like compassion and fatigue. So you need both, but interesting stuff that's going on. Boston has something in the Boston Gardens where they call it respite care hours. So they shut it down to everybody except family caregivers so that they can tour the gardens and be able to get that kind of joy. My only point of saying this is that some solutions will come from government and some will come from communities. Some will come from churches. Some will be a win-win, like that lunch dinner service actually created new business for the restaurateur and a spot for family caregivers to be able to gather. So creating these kind of constructs, I think, are empowering. In Westchester, New York, they have something called a Villages Volunteer Coaching Program for family caregivers, where people come in and coach each other I didn't know anything about family caregiving, but I will tell you, I know for my college roommates who are going through a lot of this with their parents and loved ones right now, I have the 5 things never to do when you're caring for your mother or father, tips that I think really can make a difference. In some ways, if you've been through certain journeys, you can help people go through certain other journeys. I will tell you, AARP is working on a number of different things across the country that are trying to put forth some common sense solutions to support family caregivers. One piece that I will mention has to do with the caregiver tax credit that we're moving in a bipartisan way in Congress and in states across the country. It is a little bit of tax relief for people who are spending out of their own pockets for family caregiving supplies. I'll give you one. I was sitting at my desk, and my father would often call me, and he would start every conversation like this: Elaine, I got some good news and bad news. What do you want first? And I said, I don't know, Pops, today, why don't you give me some good news? And he said, okay, we got air conditioning. Now, in Buffalo, summer lasts about 6.5 days, okay? But Pops got air conditioning. And I said, well, what's the bad news? And he said, well, a tree fell on the house and there's a hole in the roof. And that was Pop's definition of air conditioning. So quickly, I had to try to figure out how I could get that fixed. And so I called up one of my old high school friends who wasn't a carpenter, but he did own something called the Overhead Garage Door Company, and I figured that was close enough. So I said, John, you know my parents. Do you think you could come over and help Pops figure out how to fix that roof? Now, I hadn't spoken to John in 25 years, okay? But it was a good conversation. And John went over and helped him out. We paid for it. My brother and sister and I paid for the repairs. We also built out a new bathroom for them so they could walk in rather than climbing into tubs. We built a front porch for them so they could roll out and get some sunshine and roll back into the house. And we did this out of love, right? Family care, and God bless, we had the resources to be able to do those things for our parents. But some people don't. Some people are really on the edge, and that's why AARP is trying to work to advance tax credits, a simple tax credit, to try to offset some of those costs that families have in caregiving for their loved ones. For me, I think it's been almost magical that I've had the opportunity to join AARP. And it was really at the last year of my mother's life and the first few years of my father's last years of his life when I joined AARP. I will say that one thing about taking care of yourself, which is key, is that Pops, for everything he did, let his own health slide. And really, only weeks after my mother passed away, my father started to have his own health issues, which was another kind of journey for him and for us. But he never said anything to anyone. We'd go to the doctors, and he'd be with Dr. Hughes, and I said, well, Dr. Hughes had that private appointment with you. Is there anything I should know about what's going on, Pops? And he said, well, Dr. Hughes believes that the Buffalo Bills are going to have a particularly good season this year. Sometimes people don't get the straight scoop about what's really going on with your loved ones. That's why we need someone to be with us to check our own health, to also double check what the doctors are actually saying. My favorite analysis, I love Washington. Sometimes they go through all this torture of these demonstration projects. So they had one in Medicare, and they found that they funded 7 different demonstration projects in Medicare, and trying to figure out how they could help people stay out of the hospital. And the only one that worked was in Iowa. And this is what the program did. Please, if I get too wonky, let me know, okay? The most promising practice was after someone came out of the doctor's appointment, they would go into a room and a nurse or a nurse practitioner would tell them what the doctor just said. That was the most promising practice. It's been evaluated, it's been replicated, but here's the thing. You need a sounding board. You need to be able to say, is that what you really just said? Is that what you really mean? I have a very good friend, one of my besties, and she's in her 3rd bout with cancer. And what I love about Audrey is that when I call her every week, she lives in New York, I live in DC, but I call her every week, and we go through all of her medications and her treatments and all the rest. And I'll look them up, and I'll talk to it, and I'll try to figure out what the doctor said, and I'll be her counselor and all the rest. But you know what Audrey's biggest worry was? That when she was going on her 10th treatment for chemo, she wouldn't be able to do her Meals on Wheels delivery on time. Audrey's still volunteering while she's getting her cancer treatment. The resilience of the human spirit is remarkable. The contributions you all make as family caregivers is remarkable. You won't maybe fully appreciate it now. You may in the future, but the contribution that you give to your loved ones and to this country is really immeasurable. And I just want to stop there and just give a shout out to all of you. And my pal Audrey, who, by the way, last night called me and said she was able to do only 20 deliveries, but she got those in, that she's keeping on, but she's doing it with the love and support of her friends and of her family, of her community, and of her church. And so whoever you're closest to, please reach out. Take a break for yourself. And frankly, give yourself some credit. Give yourself some applause that you're doing the best that, frankly, human beings are built to be, which is compassionate and giving and empathetic. And I think that if we can devise programs and services that can help wrap around you like a hug and not an interference, that's the best this country can do. So thank you so much for letting me speak to you today, and happy to yield back the floor, as they say in Washington. Yes, yes. Yes, please do, because I spared you my PowerPoint slides.
How did you take care of you when you were?
I think it's really a critical a question. For me, I started writing a Ryan family history. And for me, the reflections of the stories that my father would tell or things that he would do was my space to sit back and to reflect. I would take that kind of quiet time, and frankly, had that joy of finding the humor as he did at such critical times. I will tell you that some of the stories I've had here, I've also put into little YouTube videos to be able to give some of these. But my mother was as funny as my father. And I remember coming out of brain surgery, she heard this beep, 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 and she opened her big blue eyes and she said to me, "What's that, Eleni? Code Blue?" She loved her soap operas, I found such joy in their humor through it all that frankly, it was refueling. And I won't deny this. Only in the last months of my father's life did I have the stress of living in the same house with my parents or my father 24/7. And I will tell you, that is a different kind of stress than being a long-distance caregiver. In some ways, my respite was going back to work. But when you're on the site, it is very hard to even capture how much stress you're actually going through. Or even seeing, when you're caring for a loved one, the deterioration of their condition. So I'll just give you this story. I came home one weekend and I saw that my mother couldn't hold a fork to eat her food. And I'm like, "Hey, Pops, I hadn't been here last weekend, but when did this start?" And he goes, "Oh, it's old age," because Pops didn't see the decline in my mother like I did, which was 2 weeks away, So I was able to get her to the doctor and found out that she had adult onset hydrocephalus, that her brain was literally filling with water, and it was putting pressure on the part of her brain that affected her motor function. And then I want to tell you that coming out of that, we got in, we went and did brain surgery, the whole thing, and then my mother said, "They say, Laney, it's a girl, it's a boy." Well, it was a gusher, because they put a shunt in. She was back to her old self again. But I will tell you that on site, you lose track of what's happening to your loved one. And I think that's another one, bringing somebody in, home health aide, a doctor, a nurse. We used to get shift nurses. My sister is particularly fast, and she would chase down after church nurses that were hospital nurses to see if they would come for some hourly work into our house. Those nurses were lifesavers for our family. They also gave us a sense of a dimension of what is right and what isn't right. And so I think those are really critical. There's another thing that's popping up in this country. I don't know if it's happening here in Montana, but they're called dementia-friendly communities. And the idea is that people who are dealing with loved ones with Alzheimer's and dementia, frankly, most caregiving journeys are about 5 to 8 years. Most Alzheimer and dementia journeys are more like 10 and 15 years or more. So what states and communities are looking to do is kind of build around services to support people who are caring for those with Alzheimer's and dementia. As simple as information about different medication changes and what it could mean, how daylight affects people with dementia. I learned from a colleague of mine that when they were laying out rehab facilities, researchers had no idea that the patterns in linoleum that are used in those facilities appear to people with dementia as black holes that they could be falling in. And some of their reaction that could be quite abrupt and negative could be because they were afraid of falling. So people are now also thinking in communities about how to wrap around families who are dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia in a different way. And so I will say, for me, I was lucky enough to have friends and family and that respite away. But make no doubt, you know it, you're in it. It takes a toll on people. And you're not weaker because of it. In fact, you're stronger because you're in it. But you can't let your own health slip. So thank you. That was a tirade that was known in Congress as Senator Filibuster. Okay, so sorry about that. See, I'm not trying to take any more questions, but are there any other questions or thoughts people have? Yes.
Here's a microphone.
She didn't have it. Elaine, what about the guilt?
Yep.
How do we deal with feeling guilty for maybe wanting to step away?
Yeah. Thank you for that question because I will say it's not only when you're in it, but also beyond. I think the best you can do here is to know that you'll be really no good to your loved one if you let yourself decline. And if you're throwing yourself into that person, that loved one's care, as you are, you have to know that if you can't do that anymore, what's going to happen? So channeling that guilt away into self-empowerment to recharge is how I think you need to step away from that. I think there's a lot of guilt around decision-making. There's a lot of guilt around finances. And so I think that stepping into groups, I don't know what your community looks like, about your friends or your family. I know there are some friends that just didn't know what I was talking about, so I couldn't relate to them. But I will tell you, I did find groups of friends who were going through the same thing, and it was quite frankly quite empowering to see that they were taking off for massages, they were going to the movies, they were having somebody else come in, not for 2 weeks, but for a couple of hours a week. That can make all the difference. And so I think if you're feeling that way, you need to kind of, maybe that's something you should also respectfully think about. Maybe it's to try to realize that you'd be no good to that person if your health starts to fail. So at the very least, get yourself an annual checkup. Make sure you're doing things for yourself. We know statistically family caregivers' health starts to decline while they're family caregiving. So don't skip those appointments. If church is where you go twice. My dear sweet Aunt Ruth, God bless her, had like 5 heart attacks, and she'd walk to church every morning. And she'd walk to church. I said, Aunt Ruth, you go to church a lot, you're going to go straight to heaven. She said, look, she goes, it's as much about me walking to church as it be being in church. And so for her, it's like Pops, it was a stepping away. And I think you have to do that. And by the way, men and women find a hard time stepping away. So in some ways, like the mayor of Sheridan, he didn't even want to share his struggle with anyone. Please share it. And please know this, that if you're feeling guilty, isolation is another killer. That's why I'm so glad folks are here. If you're in your own head feeling you're alone, you got to step out. You got to make a call. You got to talk to somebody. That one person can lead you to another person and another person and another person. It's sort of like that Cape Cod Chat Cafe. It started with 2 women who owned it. It ended up 20, and they ended up doing it now 3 times a week. People need a chance just to share. They do not need a presentation. They need a break. Thank you. Did you have a question? Yeah. If you dare, you know how I go on and on. Yeah.
Well, my situation, kind of like the question that she just asked, but I live in a rural area, and I have no relief, and I've done everything, and I've got no response to help, and I'm it. And I know that I need respite, and I know I'm at that point. I mean, I go to my doctor, I do everything on my part. And I take my time at home. My client's only 2 houses over from me, but it's like I'm it,
Right.
and what can I do?
Could I ask, is the person you're caring for older?
Yeah.
Like,
He'll be 91 in August.
Yeah. Well, I'm just a thought, and I will just offer this, that Medicare, if he's on it, which I assume he is, has a Medicare home health benefit.
Nope.
And
He
there's
doesn't, not in our area. We don't.
Oh, no, but let me just say, if you can connect to your doctor or to your hospital under Medicare for that home health, I understand when you don't have home health services because we have a huge deficit in this country of people who can come in.
Right.
But they may be able to help you with a hotline through your doctor or your hospital to be able to get some care or relief. Now, I don't want to speak to Montana here because I don't know specifically, but I will tell you, going to either the hospital or to your doctor through the hospital can help make some connections because quite frankly, that person's going to end up, in a terrible condition unless you can get some relief.
And I have gone to the doctor, and it's the VA, and gotten nowhere.
Nothing from the VA.
Nothing.
Okay. Well, my sense is, and I didn't realize it was the VA services,
Yeah.
although, they do have some family caregiver respite services, so nothing in your area, huh? God help me.
Yeah,
Well,
no.
this is why we need to change things, and thank you for stepping away. I will let you know we are trying to enhance the VA respite care. The VA is really under construction, as everybody knows. But the one thing they put in place that made sense, I think, at the time to Congress, but they have a respite care program for 9/11 vets and Iraqi war vets, but they don't have respite care programs for World War II Korea vets. It's a real glitch
And this is-
in the service delivery,
Right.
which you may
World
be
War II.
experiencing. Yeah, World War II. So,
Right.
well, if I can, I'll be staying throughout the day. So if I can come up with any ideas or try to
That would
get
be great.
maybe even a hotline from back home,
That would be
I'd be
great.
happy to help.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
just helping as a friend, not as an AARP
wonderful.
person. Okay,
Thank you
but,
so much.
but I would definitely do so.
Yeah.
And good on you for coming today. Yeah.
I just wanted to offer a little information. They do have a respite program for World War II veterans. They do qualify. We provide respite for
You do.
World War II veterans.
Great.
But it's only 30 days per calendar year. You only get 30 uses, and it has to be authorized by their social worker specially.
Great. Well, could this be a combo plate? Maybe a nice joint massage date here to be able to do that? Because if your respite care, is it through the VA or is it a separate program?
Provider for the VA, so that's why I know the
You're a preferred, okay, great. Well, then, if you have a tip, come on over to table number 2. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah. You know what, and I will say, they do have respite, and I misspoke. So let me just say this. I think the one piece that we don't have is, I think there was actually a tax credit as well in the VA for Iraqi world vets, but not necessarily World War II vets. So, but I'll check that. I know the VA does have a lot of resources. One of which is telehealth, and I don't know whether or not you've gotten into that. That's fantastic. I was in Boise, Idaho, and the VA Center for Telehealth Services is remarkable. What kind of services that they're providing for family caregivers that live so far distance. So, thanks for that. Anybody else want to offer help? Okay, good. All right, everyone's spent. Everyone's getting ready for the massage. All right, well, with that, thank you so much.